My niece stole $6,300 and laughed when I confronted her. My sister shrugged it off. That night, I froze every card they touched. At 6 a.m., the screaming started. I came home that night exhausted, back-to-back meetings, my feet aching, my head still full of emails I hadn't answered. The house smelled like whatever dinner they'd microwaved, a little burnt, a little sweet, nothing that belonged to me anymore. My niece was on the couch, knees tucked under her, hoodie up, scrolling like she owned a private little world. I asked the usual small question, "How was your day?" Because that's what you do when you're trying to be normal even when you're tired. She looked at me like I'd asked something ridiculous and said, as casually as if she'd borrowed a pen, "Oh, I used your card for snacks." And then, like she was listing groceries, and a few other things. It saved on Amazon, so it was easy. She shrugged. That little shrug sank into my ribs and stayed there. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I had learned long ago that anger in that house usually bounced off like water off oil. I went to my room, opened my laptop, and the screen hit me harder than any slap. The balance was gone. Not a few hundred, not a little overdraft, gone. $6,300. All of it. My breath forgot how to be quiet. I sat at the edge of my bed and watched the numbers like watching someone you love walk away on a train. This was supposed to be my safety net, emergency money, the thing I didn't touch unless the car died, unless my daughter needed a doctor, unless rent went sideways. Instead, week after week, tiny things had been siphoned off, groceries here, gas there, school supplies for my kid, emergencies that mysteriously happened every week. I told myself I was helping. I told myself it was temporary. I believed them when they said they'd be fine soon. But this? This was different. This was a luxury buffet of nonsense, designer bags, a pair of sneakers that cost more than my entire rent back when I was in college, high-end hair tools, niche skincare that reads like a science experiment, even a deposit for some wellness retreat. I laughed when I scrolled, a short, hollow laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was insane. The absurdity of it made my chest hurt. My niece is 18. Unemployed. She has never had the paycheck stack to do any of this. Not for a second did this look accidental. I replayed the conversation in the living room. The casual confession. The shrugged, "It's not a big deal." She said it like borrowing my toothbrush. They'd moved in 6 months ago. Supposed to be 2 weeks. My sister told me they needed time to get back on their feet, husband lost his job, their credit was wrecked, rent skyrocketing. I believed them. I opened my door. I let them in. I fed them. I gave up space, my daughter moved into my room so our niece could have her own bed. I rearranged my life around their crisis after crisis, always telling myself the same thing, temporary. But comfort has a way of settling in. It becomes a home. For them, temporary, turned into sleeping in my living room, charging their thrills to the card I kept for real emergencies. At midnight I knocked on their bedroom door. My sister answered with that sleepy, mildly annoyed look, the one that says, "Do we have to do this now?" I told her, calm as I could, what I'd found. I watched her eyes go blank for a moment, like someone switched off the lights. Then she said it, the line that felt like a blade sliding across my back, "Kids will be kids." She said it like it absolved everything. Something inside me snapped. Not a shout, not fireworks, just a quiet, heavy click, like a lock turning. I walked back to my room, closed the door, and sat down in the dark. I could hear the house settle, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the neighbor's late-night TV through thin walls. I felt very small and oddly hyper-aware at once. At 1:17 a.m., I started freezing every card they could access. Sub-accounts, saved logins, anything with their name attached or that showed evidence of their use. I called retailers, canceled pending orders, reversed payments where I could. One package had already shipped, fine. Return window, 14 days. That was a window I would pry open with both hands if I had to. By 6 in the morning I was making coffee, the steam warming my face, the mug steady in my hands. The house was quiet in that brittle way it gets right before someone yells. Then a scream tore through the rooms, not a controlled voice, not anger, but a raw, animal scream from the guest room. It stopped my hands midair. 10 minutes later the phone buzzed. My sister's husband. He was furious, immediate and loud, spitting questions about why cards wouldn't work, why the apps were locked, why their food orders wouldn't go through. He was angry for the inconvenience, for the humiliation on the porch. I listened without interrupting. I let him burn through his rant. When he finished, I put the phone down. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I didn't feel guilt. Not anymore. I felt awake in a way that was almost painful, like the first clean breath after a panic attack. By the time the sun was fully up, the house had morphed into chaos. Cabinets slammed. Voices ricocheted. My sister stormed down the hallway, slamming doors and launching rhetorical torpedoes. "How could Abigail do this to us?" she demanded into the empty air, as if I had personally taught my niece the art of entitlement. Her husband paced outside on the porch, vaping and cursing, his voice loud through the speaker as he told someone that I had humiliated his family. Inside, my niece sat like a small animal, phone clutched to her chest, mascara streaking her face, crying about handbags and the things that were suddenly being flagged for return. She cried for the stuff as though the artifacts of a shopping spree were the only things keeping her afloat. And me? I sat at the kitchen table with a mug that had gone cold, the chair creaking under me, the grain of the wood in focus like a magnified detail on a map. No one had the guts to face me head-on at first. My sister kept passing by, waiting for me to speak. I said nothing. I let the silence do the work I couldn't get out of my mouth. I wanted them to sit in that wreckage for a minute. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done. Not to humiliate them back, not to gloat, but so they'd understand, really understand, that boundaries are not suggestions. When you keep letting people treat your limits like optional rules, they will keep trespassing until there's nothing left to protect. They were still reeling, still flailing. I could feel the house vibrating around the fallout. And in the middle of it all, with the sunlight making the kitchen linoleum shine like a stage, I realized I was about to do something that would either fix this or make everything worse. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over a number I had memorized for emergencies, for theft, for fraud, for the kind of betrayal that ruins months of careful saving. What I did next would change everything. Around noon my sister finally decided to break the silence. She walked into the kitchen with that practiced, tired look people put on when they're about to play diplomat. "We need to have a grown-up conversation," she said. I agreed, partly because I wanted to see if there was even the faintest chance they'd understand what they'd done, partly because part of me still clung to that ridiculous hope that maybe they'd sheepishly admit how far they'd gone. We sat in the living room like we were at opposite ends of a negotiation table, me on one couch, them clustered on the other, all of us arranged like theater props. My sister opened with a line you could almost predict, "We feel like your reaction was a bit extreme." Then came the classics, that I embarrassed them, that I'd created instability, that I should have talked first before cutting off access to accounts. As if walking into the bank balance and finding $6,300 missing without so much as a text was just good manners on their part. Her husband jumped in, theatrical and offended, telling me I'd made them feel unwelcome and helpless. He even said, with a straight face, that I'd damaged trust between us. Trust? The word hung in the air and tasted like iron. Then my niece, the same niece who carted designer bags and a wellness retreat onto my bill, started talking about pressure. She explained, almost philosophically, that at her age stability was crucial, and shopping gave her a tiny, controllable piece of the world when nothing else felt steady. "It made me feel in control," she said, like she was describing a coping mechanism and not the destruction of someone else's savings. I listened to them speak as if they were reciting a script. There was no shame in their voices, only anger at me, which felt surreal. So I laid it out slowly, precisely. I have under $300 left. I'm behind on 2 utilities. I gave up nearly everything comfortable so they wouldn't have to sleep in their car. I haven't had a proper day off in 4 months because I picked up extra shifts to keep the lights on. My daughter lost her room and her routine so someone else could have a bed. And suddenly, after all of that, they lecture me about stability. Then I said something that surprised even me: I don't want the money back. Not because I was magnanimous, far from it, but because I didn't want to keep pretending that the return to some vague moral equilibrium would heal what had been hollowed out. I was done. Done making excuses for adults who treated kindness as an open buffet. Done believing promises that smelled like smoke. My sister started to cry. Her husband stared at the floor. My niece, mute, eyes rimmed red, got up and went to her room without a backward glance. The next morning I left before sunrise. I drove with no destination, I just needed distance. I grabbed a gas station coffee that was more warmth than taste and parked in a grocery lot, watching people go about their ordinary errands like everything was fine. I sat there for over an hour, like I was letting the world prove to me it could keep turning without my consent. When I came home, an envelope sat on the kitchen counter with my name scrawled across the front. Inside, 7 words on a scrap of paper. "We're sorry. We'll fix it." No plan. No money. No timeline. Just a wishful little sentence thrown like a band-aid over a gaping wound. That's when the truth finally landed. They didn't think they'd broken anything. Because if you believe nothing is broken, you never need to repair it. The envelope stayed untouched for 2 days. I looked at those words, read them once and then let them lie there like an insult. After that, life in the house shifted into a hollow routine. They tiptoed around me, doing the little things people do when they think they're being considerate: quiet mornings, dishes washed, shoes left by the door. It felt performative, like watching actors rehearse remorse. But watching isn't the same as trusting. I started paying attention. My niece still woke up after 10, perched on the couch with her legs crossed, thumb scrolling through a feed full of things she'd no longer be able to afford, or so I assumed. She had no job, no applications, nothing that looked like effort. One afternoon she asked me to help rebuild her Amazon cart because everything got refunded. I walked away before I said something that would have made the kitchen unbearably loud. My sister mouthed the right words about applying for jobs, then promptly forgot where she'd posted them. She told me she was considering remote work while binging old series on her laptop. Her husband retreated to the garage under the noble pretense of looking for work but mostly vaped and watched videos. They drifted through the house like people in a simulation where consequences were turned off and someone else was responsible for reality. One night I sat at the dining table after another long shift and made a list. I printed job listings from 3 local sites, entry-level positions, nothing glamorous, but real. I categorized them by skill, wrote small notes about who might realistically get which role, and even jotted down bus routes for the ones accessible without a car. It was practical, faintly maternal, and undeniably passive-aggressive. Call it tough love with a spreadsheet. The next day I called everyone together and asked for 15 minutes. They came in looking annoyed, as if I'd interrupted their favorite show. I said I didn't want to punish anyone, that I knew things were hard, and that I understood pressure. But I also told them I could no longer support 5 people on one tiny salary. I placed the printed pages in front of them and said, "Apply this week. Take action now, and we move forward together." Silence. My sister gave me a little nod. Her husband muttered appreciation without meeting my eyes. Then my niece, the same one who'd emptied my account like it was a lemonade stand, rolled her eyes, scooped up the papers, and dropped them in the trash like they were yesterday's receipt. "I'm not going to work at some fast food place like I'm 16, she said. "I'm not desperate." No one stopped her. No one corrected her. No one pulled her aside later and said, "Hey, that's not okay." That night I lay awake, tracing the slow erosion of who I'd become over the last 6 months. The woman who continually gave until she had nothing left, that person had to vanish. Not because I wanted revenge, but because survival required it. They had not just taken money. They had started taking pieces of me, my time, my rest, my dignity, my daughter's room, quiet afternoons, the small rituals that kept me sane. And I had one final move left, one last line I was willing to cross to reclaim whatever was left of my life. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling the same thought: everything in that house had flipped upside down. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about respect, or rather, the complete lack of it. The entitlement, the smug looks, the way they acted like I was the obstacle instead of the person trying to help them stand on their own, it ate at me. And my niece's words echoed louder than anything: "I'm not desperate." She had tossed the job listings I'd printed like they were junk mail, not even worth glancing at. By morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. First thing, I called into work and took a personal day. Then I started gathering receipts. The return windows were closing, and I wasn't about to let all that money evaporate. Most of the big-ticket items she had ordered were still untouched, boxes stacked in the corner of her room like trophies. I didn't ask for permission. I packed them into my trunk while she was outside laughing on FaceTime, mocking me over the card thing like I was some humorless fool. I drove straight to the high-end boutique downtown and returned the handbag first, $1.99 back in my account without a single question. Then Sephora, Nike, a trendy little boutique across town. I spent 5 hours on the road, returning every last thing I could. By the end of the day, nearly $4,500 had been recovered. Exhausted but steadier than I'd felt in weeks, I came home. That calm didn't last long. She noticed. She came storming into the kitchen, demanding to know where her stuff was. I told her plainly, it was never hers, and I returned it. She exploded. Screamed so loud it shook the walls, hurled words like thief and jealous, said I was ruining her life. And then she did something I never expected: she grabbed my coffee mug and smashed it against the wall. The crash brought my daughter out of her room, and seconds later my sister appeared, eyes wide, asking what was going on. My niece pointed at me, accusing, and threatened to call the police. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Go ahead." She went silent. That's when I finally broke. I turned to my sister and said the words I'd been holding back for months: that her daughter was unrecognizable, that I had housed, fed, and protected them, only to be repaid with manipulation, disrespect, and financial ruin. I told her that if she refused to parent her child, she had failed both as a mother and as my sister. Her husband just stood in the doorway, silent, useless. I didn't stop there. I gave them 14 days to leave my house. No more warnings, no more chances. I'd help with resources if they wanted them, but I was done carrying them. My sister started crying again, saying it wasn't fair, they weren't ready. That's when I dropped the final card. I had already called a family friend who ran a restaurant. There were 3 open positions: dishwasher, host, server, and he agreed to hire them all if they showed up Monday morning. My niece laughed in disbelief, my sister looked horrified. They thought I was bluffing. I wasn't. No one said a word that night. But the next morning, the husband, the same man who had screamed at me a week before, walked into the kitchen and asked what time the shift started. He didn't thank me, but at least he moved. By Monday at 7 a.m., for the first time in months, the house was silent. No FaceTime giggles, no scrolling, no clattering cereal bowls. Just quiet. I heard the front door close and saw him driving away. An hour later, my sister poured herself coffee and muttered she'd give the job a try. I only nodded. The friend had already told me, if they didn't show up, the offer was gone for good. At noon, my niece finally surfaced. She didn't look at me, didn't speak, just waited for the microwave to beep. Then she asked, quietly, if the rest of her orders were being returned too. I told her yes, the sunglasses, the serum, the Bluetooth speaker, still within the return window. She muttered that it was humiliating. I told her I agreed. We went to the mall together, not for bonding, but because some returns required ID verification. I stood back as she handled it, her voice small when the cashier asked for the original payment method and she had to admit it was her aunt's card. One by one, the items vanished. By the end, nearly $6,000 had been recovered. Not everything, some items were final sale, but enough. I told her to keep the receipts. I wasn't covering for her again if something showed up on my statements later. Back in the car, she sat with her arms folded, glaring out the window. She said I didn't understand what it was like to feel like you had nothing, that shopping gave her control, a break from stress. I didn't argue. I just asked her if she thought my life had been any easier. Did she think I had shopped my way out of struggle? Did she realize I hadn't bought myself a single pair of new shoes in over a year because every penny had gone to keeping 5 people afloat? She didn't answer. She just stared out the window, silent. That night I shut my bedroom door and, for the first time in months, let everything land all at once: the exhaustion, the brittle anger, the familiar, awful bruise of disappointment. I lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling until my eyes blurred, feeling like every small kindness I'd handed out had turned into a hole in me. But under the fatigue there was something else, too, a clarity that felt like a cool wind after a long fever. I had done everything I could. I'd given them shelter and food. I'd handed them chances like pebbles across a puddle, second, third, fourth chances, and watched them skip and sink. I'd printed job listings, written bus routes, showed them how to apply, even offered to help fill out the forms. I'd called and fought for refunds, I'd stayed calm when my throat wanted to close and my voice wanted to break. I brought up stolen money, I tried to teach them boundaries, and I tried to teach them responsibility. They had shrugged, negotiated, cried, promised. And still, when it mattered, they barely lifted a finger. Their father came home after a shift and went straight to bed, the day tucked under his arm like something too heavy to talk about. My sister followed later, pale and saying she couldn't handle the pressure. My niece, who'd emptied my account like it was a lemonade jar, told me, with the exact nonchalance of someone ordering fries, that the restaurant job wasn't her vibe and that she'd look for something more aligned with her personality. That phrase, "not my vibe," hit me with the strangest force. Was I living with a family or auditioning for reality TV? So I made one final, practical decision. I sat at the kitchen table and typed a short letter. No drama, no long-winded sermon, just facts. 10 days. The spare key would be deactivated. I arranged temporary storage if they needed it. After 10 days, that was it. I folded the note, left it on the table where the morning light pooled, and walked away. I didn't slip it under a pillow or read it out loud. I left it like a legal notice, like the last thing I had left to guard my life. In the morning it was still there, untouched, like a paper that had become invisible to them. 10 days passed in a slow, strange parade of mornings. I went to work, came home, cleaned, paid bills, tried to sleep. When the deadline dawned, I woke at 6 a.m. and walked downstairs expecting something, an argument, a scramble, at least an awkward breakfast. Instead the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. The guest room was empty. Baggage gone. Clothes gone. The bed was made like a stage cleared after a scene. The only signs left were small and surreal, a half-eaten box of cereal on the counter, an abandoned pair of cheap flip-flops by the door, a single hair tie on the windowsill. They left without saying goodbye. There was a strange, immediate absence that felt almost physical, like someone had taken out a structural beam and the house flexed. For 6 months I had shouldered their struggle as if it were mine, rearranging my life and my daughter's life so they could ride out a storm that, in the end, they treated more like a weekend getaway than a crisis. I'd given and given, convinced that more kindness would coax change. But that's not how change works. People don't shift because someone cushions their fall, people change when they choose to change. They never chose. The days that followed were the quietest the house had been in half a year. I cleaned the guest room like someone clearing frost off a windshield, careful, methodical, removing layers of other people's leftovers. My daughter helped me turn it back into her music room. She hummed while moving a small speaker, no speeches, no dramatic looks, just a smile when I handed her the familiar guitar. Seeing her curl up on her old bed with her posters back on the wall felt like a small absolution. I checked my bank the next day. For a long, suspended moment I stared at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves if I blinked hard enough. Just over $6,100. It wasn't everything, but it was almost everything. It was enough to start mending the parts of my life they had shredded. Enough to breathe again without the constant feeling that the floor was falling out from under me. 5 days later my phone buzzed with my sister's name. I let it roll to voicemail. When I listened later, her voice was tight but earnest. They were staying with an old friend. Her husband was trying to stick with the job he'd found. My niece was processing things and reevaluating her goals, she said. At the end of the message she added, with a tenderness that felt like a plea, "We know we messed up, but I hope you won't shut us out forever." For a beat I let that hang in the air like smoke, asking myself what the right answer was. I pressed delete. I didn't cut them off because I wanted to be cruel. I shut the door because I finally learned the painful lesson I should have learned long ago. I cannot be the safety net for people who refuse to climb. I had been their cushion, their silent yes, and in doing so I had let them turn kindness into entitlement. They used my patience like it was a credit card with no consequences. I was good, I was useful, I held things together, and it broke me. So I chose differently. I chose my daughter. I chose my home. I chose myself. No more sudden rescues. No more absorbing other people's irresponsibility until there was nothing left of me. From now on, the energy I give goes to people who respect it, people, not convenience. I stood in the doorway of the music room that afternoon, watching my daughter tune a guitar, sunlight catching on the strings. For the first time in months, the silence of the house felt like possibility, not absence. But as I locked the spare key drawer for the last time and slid the envelope into the shredder, a thought nagged at the edge of my relief: family has a way of circling back. I knew they might try to come back with apologies, with promises, with explanations that sounded like plans. I also knew something else, and this is where the next part of the story begins, that setting a boundary was only step one. There was one call I hadn't made yet, one conversation that would either close the door for good or open it a crack. I picked up my phone, thumb hovering over a number, and realized that making that call would mean lowering the final curtain on the version of me that had been a walking charity for far too long.